Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the regular Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of Wednesday, February 19th. Just before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone with electronic devices that if they're on, please put them on silent. Also like to acknowledge we're meeting in the territory of the Coast Salish people. And just prior to us turning to the agenda, I would note that this is my third meeting today. Some of you, this is at least your second meeting of today. I'd note that this is what I would call an ambitious agenda, and note that there is a closed session following the regular open session. So we have a fair bit of work ahead of us today. We haven't had as many regular meetings of the Electoral Area Services Committee in January and February as we normally do, so let's all see what we can do about working together to work our way through this. I will anticipate there being at least one break at 90 minutes and maybe one 90 minutes after that, but we'll see how we make out today. So prior to approving the agenda, I've got a couple of notes here, and you may note that we have something like 17 or 19 staff reports. When I reviewed this agenda last week, there was in the mid-20s, so we pared it down a little bit to make it a little easier for us. So we have a new business item from Area B, which will be noted as NB1. We've got supplemental items for R5, R10, and note that R18 will be deleted from this agenda and considered at the next meeting. So Ms. Harrison, you've made note of those. Is there anything else that the committee would like to add to today's agenda, today's ambitious agenda? Seeing none, could we have a motion to approve this amended agenda? Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 2 is the adoption of the minutes, and the recommendation before you is that the minutes of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of January 22nd, 2020 be adopted.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second recommendation before you is that the minutes of the special Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of February 10th, 2020 be adopted.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Next item is Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is no new business item.
No business arising from the minutes, you mean?
No business arising from the minutes.
Thank you. The next item will be the opportunity for the public to provide input to the committee on items on today's agenda. We have a fancy new timer up front there that with the green, yellow, and red light. And you have 3 minutes to share information with the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. On R2 today, you have a report from the Recycling and Waste Management Division, Re-2020 Amendment Bylaw Number 1958, Garbage and Recyclable Materials Collection. I see that there's quite a few amendments coming up, and staff will start working towards implementing universal curbside service garbage recycling and organics. Mr. Chair, we've argued this many times out in the public, and in the country, we don't want our compost picked up. It's like gold. And why should we pay to have it taken away? Also, if you look at the utility fees chart that you have on your support material, you'll see that recycling only for areas A, B, C, and H have gone up 75%. Mind you, that's only $15 over 20. But with the seniors, the pensions don't go up 75%. So I think that we have to have a closer look at garbage collecting and recycling because we're paying the highest fees on the island. Mr. Chair, also on today's agenda is R17, Hollings Road. And here we are closing another road end and access to water where perhaps we may introduce coho salmon in the future. Have these decisions been made arbitrarily, or have they approached the community? We seen last week or a few weeks ago Rat Lake Park being closed. Was the community consulted over that, or is this done arbitrarily too? So I would hope when these items come before this committee today that you look them over really good and ask yourself if the committee, if the public has had a chance to have some input on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there anyone else who would like to provide input to committee members on items on today's agenda? Please come forward to the lectern. Well, I won't call it out 3 times, but if no one else is coming forward, I don't see anyone. Next item will be delegations, which I see none, so on to correspondence. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item C1 is a grant and aid request from Electoral Area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam, Glenora, and it's with regards to the Cowichan Estuary Nature Center. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam, Glenora, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to the Cowichan Estuary Center Society to support education for youth and water conservation and riparian restoration in the Cook Isle watershed.
Moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Wilson. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. By the way, these will be going to the board meeting on next Wednesday, February the 26th. Next item, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item C2 is a grant and aid request for Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill. Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $500 be provided to Mill Bay and District Conservation Society to assist in the operation of the coho salmon enhancement project on Shawnigan Creek.
Moved by Director Wilson. Would you like to speak to it after we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Salmon.
Thank you,
Director
Mr. Chair.
Wilson.
The rest of the grant and aid ones are all coming from Area C because we're such a generous bunch down there. So I'm just wondering if, as a matter of expediency, we can deal with all 3 in one go.
Ms. Harrison, what's your pleasure on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would prefer to do them one at a time.
Okay. So on the first item, which has been duly moved and seconded, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item C3 is a grant and aid request for Electoral Area C. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $200 be provided to Young Seniors Action Group to assist in the replacement of chairs for the activity room.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item C4 is a grant and aid request for Electoral Area C. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $500 be provided to the Cobble Hill Event Society to support Music in the Park 2020.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next item, C5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item C5, the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant in aid Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to the Shawnigan Cobble Hill Farmers Institute and Agricultural Society to assist with finishing the 4-H poultry barn at the Cobble Hill Playgrounds, as this will ensure predators cannot enter the barn.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Playgrounds, fairgrounds, close enough. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. And I think so we don't forget this, we'll move NB1 up, which is a grant and aid, to be considered now. Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item NB1 is a grant and aid request for Electoral Area B, and the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area B Shawnigan Lake in the amount of $6,500 be provided to the Shawnigan Research Group to assist with bridge water sampling until the water function is further established and to cover any related costs for equipment rentals and lab fees.
Moved by Director Acton, second by Director Salmon. Any discussion on this new business item? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Well done. Item 7, information. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 7, there are 2 items of information on item IN1. One is the minutes of the Electoral Area A Mill Bay Malahat Advisory Planning Commission of February 6, 2020, and the other is the minutes of the Cobble Hill Advisory Planning Commission minutes of January 22nd, 2020, and those are for information.
Any committee members have any questions on those 2 items? Seeing none, let's move on to IN2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item IN2, there are 6 items under this item. The first one is Electoral Area A, Mill Bay Malahat Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes of November 14th, 2019. Number 2 is Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes, October 18th, 2019. Number 3 is Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes, November 4th, 2019. Number 4 is Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes of October 21st, 2019. Number 5 is Electoral Area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam Glenora Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes of November 21st, 2019. Number 6 is Electoral Area I, Yubo Mead Creek Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes of October 22nd, 2019. And item 7 is Electoral Area I, Yubo Mead Creek Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes of November 12th, 2019. And all of those items are there for information.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to, I believe Mr. Farquhar is here, I'm not sure. I have 3 questions from the committee that's on that application. One of them is Kennedy Lane, and I just wondered if the Kennedy Lane drainage, if there was any update on that one.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
at this
Farquhar.
time, there is no updates, other than it's on the operations work list for Cowichan Bay for 2020. As it's an operational matter, it'll be addressed through operations.
Thank you. And the other one is the AAP, that is that moving forward from Eagle Shores?
Mr. Chair, the AAP is moving forward, as directed previously by the board.
And your third question.
And my third question, Botwood Lane is in this, is in the minutes, and is there going to be a work party on that one? I think it was requested.
Mr. Chair, we'll be reviewing that with the co-owner of the 2 properties, that being the Cowichan Bay Fishermen's Association, in terms of what might be possible this year as a volunteer event.
Excellent. Does that conclude your questions?
Thank you so much.
For those of you that may not peruse these on a regular basis, there's some pretty interesting reading in these. I suggest that if you don't, you might try. No other questions on the information items in IN2. We will move on to reports. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R1 is the report from the Recycling and Waste Management Division regarding curbside recycling contamination Reduction and Education Program, and that report is for information.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Through you, my name is Amanda Kletchko. I am one of your environmental technologists with the Recycling and Waste Management Division. Thank you very much for having me. Oh, thanks, Joseph. The purpose of my presentation today is to talk with you about the relationship that the CVRD has with Recycle BC, the work that we've already done to meet the requirements of Recycle BC, and the work that we have planned in 2020 moving forward. So Recycle BC is the nonprofit organization in BC who looks after paper and packaging recycling. In return for collecting material, the Recycle BC provides financial incentives, permitting that we meet certain contamination requirements. Material that's considered to be contamination is anything from clothing, film plastic, styrofoam, garbage. We've seen it all in the totes, and Recycle BC has warned us of the potential for fines based on our contamination. So you may ask, how does Recycle BC track our contamination rate? Well, they have a very strictly monitored and comprehensive auditing program, so the results of which are communicated to staff on a quarterly basis. So at the beginning of each month, staff receive a randomly generated schedule from Recycle BC. Based on that schedule, the appropriate truck is selected when it arrives at Bings Creek for tipping. So the truck is unloaded, and 2 bags are filled using an excavator with material that came out of that truck. So material is totally unsorted when it gets placed in these bags. The bags are sealed and they are sent off to Recycle BC for sorting and for review. Audits are weight-based, so if materials such as metal or wood or electronics end up in those bags, this will have a big impact on the contamination rate that they determine for us. So our contamination rate is 9.5%, which is very high in comparison to the 3% rate that Recycle BC requires of all of its organizations. The numbers on the graph here represent the results of all the audits that were completed during that quarter. So 8.7% was the results for Q1 in 2017. Anywhere from 1 to 5 audits are performed on a monthly basis, with an average of 2 audits being done per month. Prolonged high contamination rates can result in financial penalties. And like I said, Recycle BC has warned us of the potential for fines based on our contamination rate. In an effort to reach out to residents, in 2019, staff executed significant outreach. Residents were reached through radio and print ads. We launched the Cowichan Recycles mobile app, which allows residents to key in pretty much any item and find out how to dispose of it. Clean recycling videos were added to the website and to Facebook. And in addition to all of these promotions, staff physically audited about 3,000 totes and rejected approximately 500 totes based on contamination. Sorry, lost my spot there. The rejections actually allowed staff to communicate with residents who needed more information about what was acceptable material in the form of information cards and letters that were sent out. Staff's objective is to achieve and maintain at least a 7.5% reduction rate, contamination rate in 2019. Based on the amount of work that was done in 2019, our rate in 2020 is 7.5%. Based on the work that was done, substantial measures need to be taken in 2020 to achieve the desired curbside contamination rate. We believe that our goal will be achieved through route-focused curbside audits and direct communication with residents. So I think that drivers and their onboard software are going to be our first line of defense. Using the onboard cameras, the drivers identify contamination such as the garbage bag seen in the photo here. This photo automatically triggers the generation of a warning letter to the resident. The letter is then followed up on the next collection day by an audit by staff. And if contamination is found at that time, a note is left on the tote is not picked up, and a second letter is generated for the resident. All of this communication is tracked in an effort to identify our recontaminators. Staff are hoping to improve the cameras that we have on board the trucks so that contamination may be more easily identified, and software updates would streamline the tracking of recontaminators. This table identifies the contamination rate of each route as it was identified in by Recycle BC in 2018-2019. So Route G6 was audited 3 times in 2 years. Route 7 was audited twice. And the numbers represent the results, the contamination rate results from that randomly generated audit. We are going to meet our contamination goals by focusing on the routes that have the high contamination rates. We recognize that most residents are doing a great job with their curbside recycling program. And the intention of the 2020 plan is to identify folks who need more information about the program or who are deliberately choosing to not participate. Staff will reach out directly to residents who have received 2 or more warning letters and have a face-to-face conversation about our recycling goals. We do want to avoid having to go down the road of issuing fines for continued contamination. So for folks who have received multiple letters and have had the face-to-face conversation, staff will need to fully inspect their recycling totes on each collection day, with the results of which being reported back to the resident. We'll continue to have a presence in the community through the generation of tote stickers, which will be placed on all the totes through the region. We will continue to have radio and social media presence. We would like the opportunity to attend your public meetings and will be available at community events. Promoting the Couch and Recycles app will be very beneficial because it allows staff to communicate directly with residents. That is everything I have for you today. Thank you very much for having me. Does anyone have any questions?
Looks like we have some questions. Director Salmon.
Thank you. And just on the warning letters, what do they say? The reason I'm asking, I had a resident ask, said he got the warning letter, but it didn't say what the contamination was, so he wasn't clear.
I understand. We had that comment a couple of times from several residents, and we have actually updated the letters. That's what the image is really important for us, because the driver has a better idea of what contamination is found in that tote, but on the daily basis we have to look at the photo, try to figure out what the driver saw, and then include that in the letter. So we have updated the letter.
Any other questions? Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on the mobile app that you've got there, just give me a very rough idea of what that has cost to produce that, and do you have any way of tracking the usage?
We do have a way of tracking the usage. Tosif might have a better idea of the cost of the app.
Mr. Wirch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's around $9,000 a year, that app to create, and it covers the full population, CVRD population. And it does track and has different categories to track, so it's totally trackable.
Follow up.
I mean, that usage is tracking the number of people who are actually using it? Is that what I'm hearing?
Through to Mr. Chair. So it can track not only the total number of how many times we contacted or somebody else has contacted, but we can actually go into the categories, the recycling categories, just recycle BC categories, so all kinds, so you can track it like really all the way down to what you need, yeah. Thanks.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. So we still continue to receive the subsidies.
Yes.
And so every year we hear how our recycle contamination is terrible and it doesn't seem to be improving. So when do you anticipate us losing the subsidies?
Mr. Warich.
Yes.
So through to Ms. Chair, very interesting question and a very valid question. We've been asking ourselves, we've been asking the Recycle BC as well. So my old example of that is the human behavior change cannot be abrupt, cannot be as fast. In 1980s, when the blue box came into being, we taught our residents to throw everything recyclable into it, and that's what we have. So a lot of us were still in the same mind, whereas Recycle BC market has moved on and changed. British Columbia is still doing really well in terms of finding the markets, and the way they can find the markets for the recyclables is by accepting the clean materials so that they can market it and they can get the revenue for it. In order to do that, it has to reverse all the way back to the users, so that when we throw anything recyclable into the blue bin, we throw the clean material and only accepted materials. So when is a good question. So allow me to also say this, that any, I think local government, that's just my personal theory on this one. So anyone who has started with the manual pickup, there was a good training on it, because especially private companies, when they picked up the manual, they lift the lid up and they looked at it, how much contamination there was in. So they trained their residents well. We started with the automated service. So the training didn't go well right in the beginning. And when I say this, it's because things were happening 1, 2, and 3, so things were happening fast. So we were in the modern size of it, for the automated pickup. Now we're thinking the education is an important part, and that's what Amanda is talking about. So we will go with all types of education in terms of electronic, in terms of reaching out to people, answering questions. We also are trying to put the stickers onto the blue bin, so that when you open the bin, you know what not to put in. So that's also an extra step. However, that's not going to finish it all. That's not going to do it all. At the end of the day, we still have to manually audit the people, what people are throwing in the recycling bin, and changing behaviors by answering their questions, by sometimes knocking on the doors. So we think it's going to take some time. It's not going to be a right-away change. And what makes it more complex is when the Recycle BC is changing their rules. We're going to teach our residents what to include, but that's not it for the next decade or so. Things will change eventually. So keep on going with the people. I think there's one message that, and the purpose of doing this presentation was that at the end of the day, we are actually going to reach out to all of you directors as well to say that, if you have any community meetings that are happening, we want to go and present this and talk to the people on ground to talk about it, so that they can talk to their neighbors and friends, so that we can spread this message, also to answer the question. So my apologies, I don't have the answer of when this will happen, and this is why when Amanda says we're going with baby steps, couple of steps, that we were in the double digit of contamination. We want to go in the single digit of contamination. And the second portion that we're hoping that when we go to the next stage of curbside, universal curbside, that is going to help us as well. So there are a couple of stages that we're looking at, and we're very hopeful that the contamination will go down in the next 2 to 3 years.
Before you sit down, Mr. Warich, so I'm just hoping to interpret what Director Nicholson was going at. We had a $32 per household rebate that we were using to subsidize the program for residents, and that's run out, that's discontinued at this point, correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that is exactly correct. So we had that money coming in, and we kept it in a vault where we didn't have a usage for it from 2014 all the way to mid-2016. And then the board decided to give that money back. That means the bills went lower. Now we're out of money, and that's why the numbers are going up.
Correct. So, was that along the lines of where you were going with that, Director Nicholson?
Well, I guess, I think I'll leave it till the next item, because there's a whole bunch of financial stuff there.
Yeah, I kind of skipped ahead a little bit there, so. Any other questions for staff? Excellent presentation, thank you very much. Ms. Harrison, next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R2 is a report from the Recycling and Waste Management Division regarding the amendment to bylaw 1958, which is the garbage recycling materials collection. And there's a recommendation before you. Would you like me to read it?
Are we having any staff come to present on this? Not at this point, it's, if there's any questions. So yes, we may as well put the resolution on the floor.
Thank
Ms.
you, Mr.
Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that bylaw number 4314, garbage and/or recyclable materials collection amendment bylaw 2020, be forwarded to the board for 3 readings and adoption.
Do we have a mover of that item? Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Acton. Now we have time for questions and discussion. Director Smith.
Thank you. I would like to ask staff with regards to page 2 in the staff report. It does indicate that the Recycle BC annual funding applied to utility bills is there for 2020. So it will be for 2020, but beyond that, it won't be there. Is that what this is indicating?
Through
Mr.
to
Ward.
Mr. Chair, so we had, so Recycle BC money is coming in until we're using this program. So we are going to be using it forever until the Recycle BC program is there. So the additional money that was collected when we started this program in 2014 until mid-2016, so we had that money set there. So that money was actually lowering the bills, you can call that superficially, at that time. So we ran out of that money. So it is still the Recycle BC money, but that has been run out. So now we're on the yearly program. When we use the program, Recycle BC program, we get the yearly funding that is subsidizing the utility bills.
Any other questions for staff? Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I find this very complicated. I don't think I understand. So when I look at Area E, it's been an increase of about $47 in 2 years, which is substantive, right? Like, my goal always is to try and keep things level, or, you know, if we have to increase, a smooth transition. And I don't like this up and down stuff. And I also understand about the cost of people not recycling properly means everyone pays for that, because it costs money to do these intensive audit programs and so forth. And so I'm just, when are we, so, and I'm confused as to how much, in this, I have to go back to the report. It's sort of a little bit confusing to me how much of it is recycling versus garbage, and where the actual costs are coming from.
Mr. Warich.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So the first question, so when we had the money, Recycle BC money, that was being collected in the function 515, we came to the board and we asked for the direction. Should we go slow increase, or should we wait and then do the increase later on? So that's as per the board. So, but at the end of the day, there are no penalties at Recycle BC at this moment, and we are in touch with Recycle BC in terms of how we do our operations. I don't really see right away something is happening, because they understand the problem, and we're not the only ones into it. So there are no penalties that anyone paying at this moment. So Was there another question?
Director Nicholson, follow up.
So how much does it cost us to do all this intensive auditing?
Mr. Warch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that is also a good question. So we do get some money in terms of education from Recycle BC. That is a separate money that we receive. That does not cover the all these the manual auditing that we do. It does cover the printing of the rec cards and some of the app, the smart app mobile. So that is the additional cost that we're paying at this moment. And we have been in touch with Recycle BC. As a matter of fact, at the time of the renewal of the contract with Recycle BC, we did request them to increase that education amount, which they did not. For the next 5 years, we don't have that money. So we're thinking that this is our problem that we're facing at this moment, and we think that, you know, with the universal curbside as well, that is going to help us with getting better with the contamination rate. So I think we're on the right track, but it is costing us money, if that's a question.
Final question.
So it seems to me that we should, do you have a target for when you would start fining people? Because everyone's subsidizing their poor behavior, and it's been going on for a number of years. So when is it that we're going to start issuing tickets?
Mr. Warch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our approach is to go with the audit system, the manual audits, that is then complemented by the truck audits. That's what Amanda was talking about, the taking a picture. That is afterwards somebody has picked up the recycling materials already. So that becomes our record. So we plan to go all the way with the education, answering questions, number one. Number two was to look at the repeat offenders and decline the pickup from that end. So that was our first, and then we come back with the board report, staff report again, and we will present it to you if it's working and not working. We're hoping that that'll make a big dent. And if it's still not working, then our final route will be towards ticketing the residents.
And I've got myself on the list next, followed by Director Wilson. So I'm just, don't need a show of hands, but if you haven't gone out to Bings Creek on a date when they've done an audit, I would suggest that you make arrangements with staff to go and attend, because when that truck gets tipped and it's from your area and you see some of the stuff that's in there, it definitely motivates you to help get the message out to the community about what's appropriate to go into those blue bins and what's not. It was a real eye-opener for me. Given that I was here when we had private contractors doing our curbside pickup, to the transition to an in-house system with the automated trucks, I see we're going in the right direction. I think that the program that staff has put forward makes sense to me. We're not at a place where we're issuing fines, and thank you for confirming that you would come to the board before you decided that that was the next step that needed to be taken. But we definitely have room to improve, and I learned a new word today, the recontaminators. I guess those are the prolific offenders. So I'm gonna mark that one down and remember it, because we obviously all have some of those in our community. But I think we're going in the right direction, and I'm somewhat comforted, because when we came in-house and just looking at the chart and the proposed fees for 2020, I recall, I believe my electoral area and Director Coons was at $176 when we were using a private contractor a number of years ago. So just through inflation, our rates would be higher than what's even proposed for 2020. So it's within a certain comfort zone that I think is comfortable, but I think it's incumbent on all of us to help with the education process, and just knowing, like, I'm now the guy that's pulling the little plastic liner out of the inside of Kleenex boxes because you can't put the plastic in with the cardboard, and so little things we learn as we go along. But I'm convinced that staff have a reasonable program that should yield results, and I think it's going to be auditing that's going to help us to get there. So I would encourage each director to attend with staff on the day that you're having curbside recycling picked up, and just to see what stuff goes in there that shouldn't. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's assume that we get to the stage where we're issuing tickets to the recontaminators. How enforceable is that? What steps would you take to actually collect the money?
Mr. Warch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and that's another question that we're also considering, and I was actually looking for some of the examples. I think somebody in Kootenai, they've started to do this, so we will track that and see how that is. Again, so that is, again, still the worst case scenario. We hope that we don't go that route, and I hope that, because we as a collective community in Cowichan Valley, I think we are one of the best when it comes to waste management. We have been leaders in that. Obviously, I mean, there are some that, you know, my own personal opinion again is that, you know, most people, they want to do the right thing. So we're going after them. We're providing them the information, the education, so that we improve on that. And they're always going to be to 2 to 3%. That's why there's a room at this moment with Recycle BC to 3%. There's always going to be a room for some contamination. Now, just for the background of it, so what happens with, where does this 3% comes from? So they're auditing by weight. So for example, everything else is good, but somebody had a propane tank, so they threw the propane tank into it. So all of a sudden you have a few pounds or a few kilograms worth of that, and that raises your contamination rate. So ticketing is probably not the most preferred way unless we are being fined through Recycle BC and nothing else is working. You know, then we'll start to look into, number one, amending the bylaw that we have at this moment, 1958, and then we'll look at it from that angle in terms of.
Follow up, Director Wilson.
Yeah, it doesn't really answer my question. If somebody is issued a ticket and I'm thinking worst case, how are you going to enforce it?
Mr. Warch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm thinking once we get to that point, I will have to find out, you know, how to enforce it, how to look at all aspects of it. We haven't gone to that road, so I don't have an answer for you at this moment. Thanks.
Rely on best practices of other jurisdictions that are successful in that. Director Salmon.
Thank you. Just on the education piece, is there an up-to-date sticker that goes on the blue box? I should know this, but could.
Mr. Warch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So no, we don't. We have a rec card that we give it to the residents, but there's nothing posted on the blue bin. But we plan to put one on. So we have printed the stickers. It's going to we're going to try to use the summer students this summer to go and reach out to some of the houses whatever we can this summer.
Or could there be one that people can just put on themselves? Do you have to use summer students? Could we not send a sticker?
Mr. Warch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So so we prefer that we don't really send it to the mail so that it get lost in one way or the other. What we want to do is we want to go, and when we audit it ahead of the truck, we actually go and post it ourselves.
And just a final comment for some perspective. This regional district is highly regarded for the waste management and the recycling diversion that we do. I would ask, are we still in that 70 to 75% diversion rate on our overall waste diversion? So I would hope that we wouldn't have Recycle BC targeting us as one of the first one. We actually do our garbage very well. It's not a very glamorous part of local government, but it's an important part. So I congratulate you on the work that you've done. And just looking around the room, we do have a resolution before us. I don't see any other hands, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. And that will go through to our board meeting next Wednesday. Ms. Harrison, next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is item R3. It's a report from the Development Services Division, and there is a recommendation attached.
Welcome. Is this one of your first ones, Ms.? Well, welcome. We're a pretty friendly bunch, I think. And aim it towards you a little bit.
Okay. Thank you for bearing with me. So I'm presenting application number COV 18D01, a covenant discharge for Lot 3 Pritchard Road. So this is the subject property. And the applicant is requesting to discharge the restrictive covenant CA 452545 related to Cowichan Bay sewer capacity. The covenant states that the covenantor understands and confirms to the district that only one sewer capacity unit is available for the lands, and further development requiring sewer service is not permitted until additional sewer capacity is available. At the time the covenant was registered, the sewer capacity was limited to only one unit. Since the time of covenant registration, the sewer capacity has increased and new sewer capacity is available for the property. The existing property has purchased, or the existing owner has purchased a total of 20 sewer units for the property, which has been confirmed with engineering services. The owner would now like to sell the property and would like the covenant discharged before the sale, as it is no longer applicable. Please note that any future development on the property would be required to conform to all the zoning bylaws and the subdivision servicing bylaw and the official community plan, which do ensure that development would have to be connected to the sewer system. So this does not by any means approve any development.
Thank you. Before we go to recommendation, Director Yanni Donardo, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you too, I'm not sure if Chloe could answer this or engineering staff. How would the general public know that there are sewer units available? Because as far as I knew, we had 0, and apparently it keeps changing. So how would the general public know so they could get in on the units?
Wise move.
Few questions.
Wise move. Mr. Dennison, can you answer that question?
So the JUB capacity units is a little bit of a mysterious process, and there's been several waves. So for each of our utilities, Eagle Heights and Cowichan Bay, that are connected to the JUB for treatment and discharge of effluent, we have an agreement with them, and our capacity is limited to capacity units. And so we must possess capacity units in order to send that sewage to them. And there's a limited amount between the various parties that are connected to the JUB. So in Cowichan Bay, we had a number of them initially when we joined. So Eagle Heights was there at the beginning and got an original, we'll say original quantity of capacity units when they were first brought into, when they were first created as part of JUB initially. Cowichan Bay joined later, and units were purchased from Duncan, City of Duncan. A little bit later, some were transferred from Eagle Heights. And then twice now, the JUB has recalculated the value of a capacity unit because as time has gone on, the number of people per household has been dropping, and people are increasingly using water conserving fixtures that reduce the water flow as well. So between those two factors, the number of units that the JUB can handle has been increasing because the demand for each unit has been dropping. So periodically, we've gotten now twice, we've gotten these increased allocations of units in the Cowichan Bay sewer system. So once they come in, we don't advertise particularly. What we have done, there's two things we've done. One is the planning department worked out a program whereby they initially directed those units to the existing service area of Cowichan Bay, and then secondarily the next level of appropriate properties to be connected to the system, and then the next and next. And I think there was 3 or 4 steps, as I recall, maybe 4 steps along the way, the priority given to the highest priority according to planning purposes and on. So we worked our way through all of those levels, and we still had units available. So then they're just available for whoever comes along and wishes to join the system. In this case, this property is right in the middle of the existing service area. So, and they were actually in the service area as well, and they were only constrained by the covenant. So when they knocked at the door, and we had units because of the recent, the last dollop that we got from the JUB, we allow them to have those units, as well as anybody else in the service area at the time. We are down to 0 again, though, Mr. Chairman, by the way.
Time for a recalculation.
Yes.
Director Yanni DiNardo,
As long
another
as-
question.
As long as they're not recontaminators. What is the timeline for the use of the units? So now, I understand that this property purchased these units in April of 2018. So there is a timeline. What is the timeline now that they use up the units, and who's following that?
So what we do, Mr. Chairman, is that in order to acquire units, you have to have some kind of process underway. So a rezoning, DP, PLA application, something of this nature. This particular property had a PLA application that accompanied their request for units, so that's fine. So then that PLA process has to be, the development process has to be current, which it is currently as well. If they lose that PLA because they haven't acted enough, and they have nothing else in stream, like a rezoning or something else, then we'll get those units back. We'll pay them out, though, but then they have to relinquish those units. So that's the way we work that.
So there's no open black market of Jub sewer units then? We sort of
trying
are
to-
in control of them.
Mr. Chairman, that is exactly the intent, to avoid a black market in units. There's been mysterious of units in the past, but I won't go into that.
Let's not go there. Director Yanni DiNardo, another
So,
question.
the PLA, they need to be in the process. I understood it was a year that they had, so that's not exactly right now.
The PLA can be renewed, though, right? So long as it's
So they
current.
can keep renewing, not moving forward, but renewing and then holding those units.
So long as highways approves a further extension of the PLA, which they'll only do if there's reasons for it, then we'll keep them current as well.
Okay. Yeah,
Sometimes,
little-
development processes can be very complex. There can be a lot of issues that come up or whatever. So we don't want to be in a situation where, a developer or any landowner has invested a lot of money in a process, and then they hit some sort of complexity, and we say, oh, time's up, and we pull it out. So long as it's current with that's been our approach so far anyway. As long as it's current with, say, a rezoning or whatever, then we'll keep the capacity units in hand.
So I just wasn't aware of the recalculation, because when people were calling me, I still understood that we had 0 capacity units. So I don't know how we're gonna keep up to date, or at least keep the community, or at least the director, because I know that I was sent at one time the recalculation. I think you have so many units, but I didn't know exactly that we were holding so many. So when people call, I understand how it works. If you're in the service area, we are obligated.
Correct.
So it would be good to have some kind of communication on that part.
I'm sorry if we missed you. I thought we did, but
Yeah,
we'll
well,
check on that.
I could have missed it too,
apologies.
but it'd be good to say, okay, right now you have, 120, or you have this, or whatever, because
Yeah.
I think I saw something that said the units we had, but I didn't really realize that we had capacity.
Right. So Cowichan Bay Estates, by the way, has absorbed a lot of units in that development. There was original development agreement, and there was going to be a transfer of units from North Cowichan to support that development, but that agreement expired. And then at the time, we'd had this expansion of units from the JUB, so we have units available. They were within the service area, and so we were obliged to provide them with
So
units.
I'm going to suggest that we might consider having our friends at the JUB come and present, but I think it would be more appropriate at a regional services meeting, just to give us some information as to how it's operating and whether there's any recalculations, or unless you have a better suggestion, Mr. Dennison.
Well, as a matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, right now, there is, and we've been trying to get this going for quite some time, but the JUB is considering looking into other governance structures. So there's an assessment or investigation, maybe feasibility study, I don't know what you want to call it, but that they are planning to launch shortly. I just spoke to the engineer at North Cowichan, Mr. Reitzma, and he said, yeah, he's trying to get this out. The other partner, the City of Duncan, are very keen to see this come forward, so that will be brought forward. They understand that the main issue is capacity units and their distribution. So, for example, in Eagle Heights, we have almost 400 units available, unused, because not much happening in Eagle Heights for whatever reason. Maybe the planners know, I don't. But Cowichan Bay, everybody wants to live in Cowichan Bay, so there's lots of activity there and the units get used up.
Thank you. Final question?
No, I'll move the recommendation.
Excellent. Seconded by Director Acton. Ms. Harrison, would you read the recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that restrictive covenant number CA 4522545 on parcel identifier 005490383 be discharged.
Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries and go to next week's board meeting. Next item, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R4 is a report from the Development Services Division, excuse me, regarding DVP 20E01, and there is a recommendation.
Ms. Boyle, are you presenting to us? Thank you very much.
Perfect. So I'm presenting application DVP 20E01 for 4735 Waters Road. The applicant is requesting a development variance permit for an existing farm building of 105.1 square meters and a height of 7.56 meters to be permitted as a residential accessory building with a small suite of 90 square meters on the second story. The accessory building floor area and height are greater than the maximum of 100 square meters and 7.5 meters respectively allowed in the Electoral Area E zoning bylaw. So the property is zoned A1 primary agriculture. However, the southern portion of the parcel is not within the ALR. Two dwellings are currently located on the property, one in the northern portion of the parcel within the ALR and the other in the southern portion that is not within the ALR. The applicant applied for a farm building siting permit in 2017 and constructed the proposed building. After the farm building was constructed, the building was constructed in the southern portion of the property outside the ALR. After rethinking the use, the applicant would like to convert the existing farm building into a residential accessory building with a small suite of 90 square meters on the second story. The addition of the small suite requires that the building now be issued a building permit for a residential accessory building, and the building in question is 105.1 square meters in floor area and 7.56 meters in height, and so requires a development variance permit before it can be issued a building permit.
And we have a recommendation before us.
Sure.
Any questions for staff? Turn to the director for the area. Moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by DiNardo. Any discussion on this item? Ms. Harrison, would you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that development variance permit number DVP 20E01 for PID 009656642, excuse me, to vary section 5.2E of the CVRD Electoral Area E Cowichan Station Satlam Glenora zoning bylaw number 1840, 1998, to increase the maximum size of an accessory building from 100 meters squared to 105.1 meters squared, and to increase the maximum height to 7.56 meters, be approved.
Seeing no other hands, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. That will go to next Wednesday's board meeting. Next item is R5, and you should all have some supplemental material that goes with this. And Ms. Wright.
Good afternoon. So I'm just going to do, this is for TUP 19D01 at 5255 Chester Road. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of temporary use permits before I begin on the application. So Local Government Act permits local governments to designate areas in an official community plan or zoning bylaw where temporary use permits may be allowed, and to specify general conditions regarding the issuance of a temporary use permit in those areas. Temporary use permits require approval from the CVRD Board of Directors to permit a temporary land use that does not conform to applicable zoning bylaws. A temporary use permit can be issued for up to 3 years and can be renewed once by the CVRD Board for an additional 3 years. In terms of this proposed application, the Cowichan Bay zoning bylaw prohibits the use of portable storage containers in all zones. The Cowichan Bay official community plan designates the entire plan area for the issuance of temporary use permits for uses that would otherwise not be permitted on the lands for which they're proposed. So in this case, the purpose of the temporary use permit is to permit a portable storage container at 5255 Chester Road. The applicants have proposed to screen the container, as seen on the slide, as well as the existing garbage containers will be screened with a new wood frame and black metal panel fence. If final approval is received by the CVRD Board of Directors, the TUP will be valid for 3 years with the ability to renew it once for an additional 3 years. As a condition of issuance of the temporary use permit, the owner of the land will be required to pay a $2,000 bond to the CVRD that will be held as a form of security for the duration of the permit. At the direction of the CVRD Board, I believe it was in December, a public meeting was held this morning at 9 a.m. in the boardroom here. There were no submissions received and no members of the public attended. Public notification of the application also included sending letters to adjacent property owners and tenants, posting a notification sign on the subject property, and advertising the public meeting in 2 consecutive issues of the local newspaper. As of today, no comments have been received. As such, it is recommended to the board that TUP 19D01 be issued.
Turn to the director for the area.
I'd like to move the recommendation.
Seconded by Director Kuhn, and I think we just had the recommendation read out, didn't we? We did. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. The motion carries, and that will go to the board meeting next Wednesday. Thank you very much. Ms. Harrison, next item, R6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R6 is a report from Development Services Division regarding application number ALR 19H01, and there is a recommendation.
Welcome, Ms. Herrera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the item before you is a referral that's been received by the CVRD from the Agricultural Land Commission, and with file number ALR 19H01. And this is for the property at 13235 and 13250 Viola Lane. So this property is located in Electoral Area H in the Yellow Point area, and Viola Lane is a newer gravel road that's been constructed as part of the first phase of the subdivision that has occurred here. The areas shown in gray on this location plan show the current parcel being proposed to be subdivided, and the original parcels were all along Yellow Point Road. However, Viola Lane was constructed as part of that phase. And the applicant's plan is to subdivide the existing parcel now into 7 lots, which includes 1 remainder lot. So I've just added sort of the numbers to show more clearly the proposed subdivision. And this phase generally had all the approvals, at least from the ALC, PLA, and had been going through a development permit. They had extended those approvals several times, and ultimately the ALC then did not agree to extend it, and those approvals expired, and a new application was required. And so they're only going to propose this second phase. They had originally lots also on this remainder portion, but because they got to a certain point with the initial or the second phase, they'd like to just go ahead with this phase and leave the remainder, and understand that another future ALC application would be required for that parcel. So staff has recommended that this application be forwarded to the ALC with a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Turn to alternate director Hay.
Just a couple questions for staff. There's I understand the rationale behind the recommendation of option one. There's three other options listed there. Specifically, the ones, option 3 and option 4. What would be the implications of moving recommendation for denial and not forwarded, or recommendation for denial and forwarded to the ALC?
Ms. Herrera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it was not forwarded to the ALC, then the application would not proceed any further and would not be considered by the Agricultural Land Commission, and they would require approval through the ALC in order to be able to subdivide. So if the ALC approved this phase again, then they go through the actual subdivision application through the MOTI and back to CVRD again. If it was forwarded with a different recommendation, either for a denial or without a recommendation, then the ALC will just consider the application on its merits.
Okay. Follow? Also in relation to the process side of things, if this land was not in the Agricultural Land Reserve with the existing OCP in that, it would not be at our table. Is that correct?
Mr.
Ms.
Chair,
Herrera?
thank you. The minimum parcel size actually is being met currently with the existing zoning. So they would, if it was not in the Agricultural Land Reserve, or yeah, it would not have had to apply through the ALC and come this way around. But they could still apply to subdivide.
Okay. If there's no other questions, I have one more, but.
Well, tell you what, I'll go to Director Nicholson and come back. Director Nicholson?
I've got several questions, but I'd just like to ask one right now. When was phase 1 done?
Right, I don't have that right off the top of my head. It's been a while. I think the lots maybe were registered 2008? Is that right? Yeah. Okay, maybe around 2010.
Alternate Director Haim?
Related to that question, is there a specific reason for the delay, recognizing they went through PLA and the PLA's expired, and I mean, we're basically kind of 12 years down the road?
I don't know if that's a question for staff, or do you want the applicant to answer that one?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think that'd be a better question
So
for
can
the
you
applicant.
perhaps hold that? We'll get any other questions for staff, then we'll get the applicant up. Any other questions for staff at this point? I guess that means we're going to invite the applicant
Sure.
up, and we can have that question posed again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome. So just, I'll turn to alternate Director Haim and pose your question, please.
Hi. What's the reason for the delay between the original approvals through the PLA to where we are now?
It was all a matter of economics, Mr. Chair. When the first phase was developed, everything took a crash in 2008. We had to sell lots in the first phase to go ahead with building the road, wells, septic areas, and so forth for the second phase. So that took some time. By then, the Agricultural Land Commission gave us a 6-month extension, and then that expired. It was about the time the BC government was revamping the Agricultural Land Commission. Had sent them an email, got a reply, said you'll hear something in 5 business days, and it was 8 months later that we got something back from them. So there's been some delays along the way for that reason.
Fair enough. Just seeing no other hands, is there any, oh, Director Nicholson, is this for applicant? Fire away.
What is the water situation like at that parcel?
Drilled, Mr. Chairman, drilled wells in every lot, vary from maybe a half a gallon per minute to there's one well there that has in excess of 20 gallons per minute.
Further questions? Okay. While you're up there, is there anything that you would like to add or have the committee know in regards to the staff report that we've considered? Anything you'd like to add?
You know, this, they don't often allow subdivisions in ALR land, Unfortunately, this piece of property is in the ALR sitting by itself several kilometers to the next piece of agricultural land reserve land, which at the time it came in included an operating dairy farm that didn't get put in the ALR, since been subdivided. The property right beside this is suitable for farming, not in the ALR. So with this land here, it had maybe 14 acres of good property, good usable land out of 140 when we bought it. So for someone to buy that property at, $1.6, $2 million, you'd have to be a pot farmer. And if you're not doing that, people can't afford to buy that and use the land. So as per the ALR, this phase, ALC, this phase includes 4 5-acre lots, and then the other 2 lots are kept bigger, and they were the pieces that had original fields that were used for farming. So if someone can buy those, it would be ideal for small-scale farming.
Great, thank you very much. And I gather we're gonna have another question for staff. Was that your intent, Director Nicholson? I'll tell you what, I'll turn to the
Okay.
director for the alternate director for the area, and we can see about getting a recommendation on the floor, and you can have an opportunity then. So alternate director Haim, what's your pleasure?
Thank you. I fully understand staff's recommendation in the report. It's based on some documents such as the OCP, which is roughly 27 years old. While it does meet the existing OCP, I would desire some additional input. And so therefore, I make a motion that we refer the item to the Area H APC for input and comment.
It's been moved and seconded. I'm just wondering if that is an item that would normally be referred to our Advisory Planning Commission on a matter such as this, just for clarification, Ms. Sherrill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This type of application is not normally referred to the Advisory Planning Commission. However, the Electoral Area Service Committee has the ability to recommend to the board that the application be referred to the APC. That power is available to you under Local Government Act.
So just for clarification purposes and ensuring that we're giving them adequate direction, are you wanting to refer this to the APC to consider the 4 options that are contained in the staff report?
Correct.
Okay, so it's been duly moved and seconded. Director Acton.
Thank you. I'd just like to comment. I think that is a really wise decision, considering that Director Haim is here as an alternate, and we're all sitting here as one representative from our community, and sometimes these decisions are quite complicated, or we are one voice out of 9. So it is kind of nice to have some more public representation. I think that's a great idea.
Any other discussion on the motion? Director Nicholson. I think it'd be appropriate to have you, is it in regards to this item? Okay, then I think we should hear your input while we've still got a resolution on the floor.
Well, it's not specific to this resolution, but I am really concerned about these kinds of ALR applications that it seems to bypass the community the way the process is running right now. And it seems to me that they're quite important and need to be, I know that there's sort of an advertising requirement, but the last time it happened in my area, it was completely out of sync with when we dealt with it here. So it would be, I think it would be helpful if there was some notification process, and maybe it's consideration with the director about whether the APC should be to look at them.
Thank you. Ms. Sherrill, I think you might have a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For information, staff are preparing to come forward with a draft a revised draft development approval procedures bylaw. And through the discussion on that bylaw, you may wish to consider policies related to referrals and incorporation of those into that bylaw.
Better than I could have put it. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. The motion carries. This will go to the Area H APC. Next item, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is R7. It's a report from Development Services Division regarding application rezoning 18F01. And there are two options, and staff are recommending option number 1.
Ms. Herrera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this application is an official community plan amendment and rezoning application for a property along Cowichan, and the file number is RZ18F01. So this property is located in Electoral Area F and is located along the municipal boundary of the town of Lake Cowichan. And the property is actually 3 separate areas, which are all shown in the gray shaded area and outlined in black. There has frontage on Cowichan River, Greendale Road, Cowichan Lake Road, and Cowichan Valley Highway. The site is currently vacant and heavily treed, and yeah, I was going to mention that the area along Cowichan River is known as Little Beach, and you can see here they're all outlined in white this time. And this is the OCP map. So each of these little separate areas of the parcel have a different land use designation within the OCP. The larger majority of the lot is forestry, which is the light blue color. The yellow is on Greendale Road, is suburban residential, and the green, which is RC on the map, is river corridor, fronting the river. So the zoning map looks very much the same with the 3 different zones that correspond to the OCP designations. The plan here, the applicant proposes to transfer 2 areas along Greendale Road to the CVRD for park and subdivide the larger area along Cowichan Lake Road into 4 residential lots, and they would be serviced by private wells and septic systems. The draft OCP bylaw and text amendment, is a map and text amendment. Would change the designations to rural residential and parks and institutional, as well as address the density of the lot. The draft zoning amendment also involves map and text amendments to ensure the proposed density is achieved through the transfer of the park as an amenity to the community. So as outlined in the staff report, this application is being supported by staff, and it's recommended that the bylaws go for first and second readings. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Director Smith.
Can you just go back to the map that shows the white outlines there? So there's, some of the property is beside the river, you're saying, and is it in a flood zone area? Or, I mean, you can't tell from there, but has it been recognized as a flood zone?
Ms. Herrera? How about I jump in here? It's in a flood zone, and if this was moved and seconded, I'd speak to the nature of the potential use. So moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Yanni Denardo. So just to give you some background, this is right adjacent or partly connected to Little Beach, which is the main haul-out area for tubers and swimmers and the like. When this applicant came forward and met with staff, it was sort of fairly well known in the community that the town of Lake Cowichan really wanted Area F to spend Area F taxpayer dollars and to buy those little pieces of land there. As it turns out, the applicant came forward, saw the benefit of those little pieces of land to be held in community trust, and have proposed those as amenities for the exchange or for consideration of rezoning. Just so you know that this would be a very important protection and enhancement of the area, and MOTI, which owns Greendale Road going through there, has done a site visit, has looked at the potential of working with CVRD and MOTI to put in safeguards to ensure that any future erosion or amenities that could be placed, we could do in conjunction with them. I think our park staff are well aware that this has been a highly sought after acquisition for a number of years, and there's great potential in a win-win situation if this were to be moved forward and the community were to look favorably upon it at a future public hearing. Does that help?
Just to follow up, would that mean that the parks area budget in your area would be responsible for the funding of those improvements on property? And then if there was flooding, that it would be under the parks under your parks budget?
Parks are aware of this, and it's, as I said, viewed by all stakeholders as a win-win situation. Any other questions for staff? Director Nicholson.
Is there are there any guidelines or development permit related to the corridor along the highway? I happen to think that that Highway 18, protecting its sort of treescape is really important from a regional perspective, and it would be a shame if when this
Ms. Herrera.
changes, it isn't preserved.
Okay, Mr. Chair, the only development permit area that would be triggered later if the zoning goes through as proposed would just be for riparian areas at the subdivision stage. So there's no current guideline and development permit area in place to require a buffer of some kind like that. So if there's riparian areas close to the road, then those trees would be protected. I know there are quite a few riparian areas on this lot, and so there is quite a bit more work to be done there, but I don't have that mapped yet.
Follow up?
So I understand about there are some important riparian areas, but is there anything that can be done to improve
Ms. Herrera?
Yep.
the viewscape?
Sure. So right now, this is the time. If the committee wanted to see some additional conditions put in place, this would be the time to do it here through the committee.
Director Nicholson?
I think we should consider doing that. I'm not quite sure how to go about
Director
what
Acton.
the options would be.
Well, couldn't something also happen at the public hearing stage of protecting those trees when we come back afterwards?
Well, I would turn to staff. There's no tree cutting view corridor development permit area in electoral area F at this point, so there wouldn't be any consideration of that. I do believe we've had commitments by the applicants to ensure that all the riparian corridors and the likes are taken care of. I see Mr. Limshu coming up to the lectern, so perhaps we'll turn to him first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in response to your concerns, I mean, certainly if this is an issue for the board, we can certainly work with the applicant through the rezoning process to register a covenant to protect a width along that highway to ensure that greenscape corridor is maintained, through any development that may take place in the future.
Director Nicholson.
So when we move this recommendation, do we need to add anything to make sure that happens?
Ms. Gerolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify for the committee that there are a couple of options. So one would be that staff be directed to prepare bylaws and forward them and to incorporate into those bylaws provisions requiring buffering and screening. So there's the ability through zoning to require buffering, tree buffers or screening. We also have the ability to require covenants. So covenants requiring certain tree buffer width, height, tree stand type, etc. those types of details are ideally worked out well in advance of a public hearing. And if you are wanting to incorporate those things into bylaws, that should be done in the bylaw drafting stage and not after the bylaws have received first and second readings. So if you're looking to incorporate those types of provisions, I would say that provide that direction to staff, and staff would work with the applicant to prepare bylaws that would reflect that intent.
Which it kind of sounds like staff have heard very clearly that considerations of those natures would be the next discussion they have with the applicant. Director Nicholson.
Well, should we refer this back to staff to do that work before we go any farther then?
Do we want to see this? Okay, moved and seconded, referred back to staff. Boy, I can't wait till we get the report later on. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is item R8. It's a report from the Development Services Division regarding application number COV19E02 with 3 options, and staff are recommending option number 1.
Mr. Limshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This application, COV19E02, fairly straightforward. There's an existing covenant registered on title. The covenant was registered at the time that the property owners built basically an accommodation over a garage, providing a second dwelling. So in keeping with the provisions of the zoning bylaw, a covenant was required at that point in time, and that was back in 2012. The owners of the property have indicated that they'd like to subdivide the property. However, they cannot proceed with the subdivision with the covenant still in place. The zoning is R2. The minimum parcel size is 2 hectares. The subject lands are approximately 6.3 hectares. So there is room to subdivide. However, the covenant is a bit of a hurdle for them. So they've made application to requesting a release of the covenant so they can proceed with the subdivision. There is a provision in the zoning as well under section 5.23, which actually addresses this kind of scenario. And certainly in reviewing the application, the applicants are able to meet the various conditions outlined under section 5.23. Staff's reviewed the application and recommends that the covenant be discharged.
Any questions for staff? Turn to the director for the area. Move the recommendation, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And I think I'm going to call for a 10-minute recess. Reconvene at 3:10. Can we have directors back to the table, please? Next item on the agenda is item R9. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R9 is a report from the Development Services Division regarding application DP19C07. There are 2 options, and staff are recommending option number 1.
Mr. Limshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The application before you, DP19C07, relates to the properties located at 1221 and 12 Hutchinson Road. Effectively, the property owners have made application to subdivide the parcel to create 3 new parcels. So at the end of the day, there would be four parcels. The site in question is located within development permit area and subject to those regulations within the official community plan. Specifically, sections 10.41A, sections 10.4.5A, which relates to landscaping, rainwater management, environmental protection, and section 10.4.11A, subdivision guidelines. So staff has reviewed the proposed subdivision in relation to those DP guidelines, and through the reports that were received to address the environmental issues as well as the rainwater and drainage management plan issues, feel that the proposed development meets the intent of the development permit guidelines. The diagram that you see before you indicates the proposed subdivision layout. So at the end of the day, should the subdivision be approved, there'd be 2 lots fronting on Hutchinson and 2 lots fronting on Fairfield. The recommendation before council, there are 2. One, to approve the development permit application, but the second one also deals with the 10% lot frontage requirement. So as you see before you on the subdivision layout, there's a panhandle lot being proposed off Hutchinson, as well as a panhandle lot being proposed off Fairfield. Technically, the frontage does not meet that 10% rule. Thereby, the approving authority would require support from the board to relax that requirement. Any questions?
Questions for staff? Director Nicholson.
Thank you. Why would you want a 10%? What is important about 10%?
In the Act, there's a provision in the Act that basically speaks to a minimum of 10% frontage. So effectively, when the regulations are created, they want to ensure that the lots are wide enough to accommodate a house or a building on the parcel. And so 10% has been that rule that's embedded in the, I want to say the Municipal Act, or is it? Local Government Act. Sorry, I'm dating myself now. Yeah, so within Local Government Act, there is actually a provision with respect to 10%. The approving authority, or the Act actually, gives the ability to the local jurisdiction to waive that 10% rule. So within the report, sorry, not within the report, but as the approving authority, one has to ensure that the lots are wide enough to accommodate the intended development at some point in time. Given the size of these parcels and the width that's being provided, there will be no issues with respect to providing for the intended use, which is single-family dwelling. So in this case, it would be a house, septic field, and given this area, they'd be connected to community water.
Turn to the director for the area. Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, could I have the resolution read, please, Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that development permit application number DP 19C07 in regard to parcel identifier 004-832-574 be issued, and number 2, that the requirement for 10% lot frontage onto a road for lots B and C in the proposed subdivision of parcel identifier 004-832-574 be waived.
Seeing no other hands, call the question. All in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. That will go to our next meeting next Wednesday. Next item, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is a report from the Development Service Division regarding application number DVP 19D02. There are 2 options, and staff are recommending option number 1.
Mr. Limshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The application before you, number DVP 19D02, relates to the property located at 55 Samuel Road. The purpose of the application is to relax the side yard setback requirement. So under the current zoning bylaw A1, the minimum side yard setback is 15 meters. However, the applicants are requesting a relaxation from 15 meters to 7.2 meters. And the purpose of the relaxation is to basically address the siting of an existing building. The applicants, Affinity Cider House, is looking to convert an existing farm building into a cidery. And so they've made application for a building permit. through that process, we recognized that they do not meet the minimum setback requirements for side yard under the current zoning, hence the need for the variance. So effectively, what we're doing here is legitimizing the siting of the existing building on the property. Any questions?
Director Yanni DiNardo.
I'd like to move the recommendation.
Seconded by Director Salmon. Any questions, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next item is Harrison. Oh, I didn't have it read out. Well, let's keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R11 is a report from Development Services Division regarding application RZ 1810, no.
I-01.
I-01, thank
Yes,
you.
I01, yes.
There are two options and staff are recommending option number 1.
Mr. Limshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Application number RZ18I01 relates to the property located at 8394 Casinos Road. The property owner has made application to amend the official community plan and amend the zoning on the property. The purpose of the application is to allow for future subdivision of the parcel. The property owner would like to basically split the parcel in two, as shown on the diagram that you see in front of you. Unfortunately, under the existing zoning and land use designation, it doesn't allow for this subdivision to occur, hence the need for both an OCP amendment and a rezoning. So with respect to the OCP amendment, the land use designation would be changing from TC or tourist commercial to urban residential. And with respect to the zoning amendment, the zoning would be changing from tourist commercial, C4, to urban residential, R3. So one of the rationales for the change, as shown in this picture, is while the entire area or neighborhood is designated for tourist commercial, the reality is there are conflicts down there with respect to the existing uses. And so if the property were to develop for future tourist commercial, the concern is that there would be further conflicts. The picture that you see before you is just an illustration of the parking conflicts that currently occur on the site or occur on that street in that particular neighborhood. The proposed application is effectively a downzoning of the property to allow for the creation of this one parcel to allow for a future single-family dwelling. Questions?
Questions for staff? Turn to the director for the area. Seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Ms. Harrison, would you read option 1, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Option 1 has 2 points. That it be recommended to the board, number 1, that official community plan and zoning amendment bylaws for application number RZ18I01 for parcel identifier 001-282-166 be forwarded to the board for consideration of first and second reading. And number 2, that a public hearing be scheduled with directors from electoral areas I, F, and E as delegates.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Limshu. Looks like we're going into an engineering section now.
Always glad to be here,
What
Mr.
was
Chairman.
my first hint? Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R12 is a report from the Water Management Division regarding proposed budget amendments for Mill Bay critical street lighting.
Mr. Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So BC Hydro recently reviewed the lights under our critical street lighting program and determined that they've been undercharging us or not charging us for a number of our lights in Mill Bay, and came back and said, oh, we're going to charge you for them now. We had some awareness of this and socked away some money in operating reserve, $2,466, but the actual charges were resulting in a $3,600 deficit and the function. We had already increased through the budget process our requisition to make up some room in that, but we need to amend the budget and add another $607 so we can balance the 2020 budget accordingly and set the stage so that we can actually make the payments the proper amount from here on.
Any questions for staff? Turn to the director for the area. Recommendation moved, seconded by Director Kuhn. Ms. Harrison, recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that the 2020 budget for function 557, which is critical street lighting electoral area A, be amended to 1, increase requisition by $607, and 2, increase surplus deficit by $607.
Seeing no other hands, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Next item is Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R13 is a report from the Water Management Division regarding water system management bylaws and 2020 amendments.
Mr. Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These are the bylaw amendments for increases in user fees as were approved in our 2020 budget process for 7 different water utilities.
Any questions for staff? Somebody want to move it? Moved by Director Yanni Donardo, seconded by Director Acton. Ms. Harrison, would you please read them out for us?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the following bylaws be considered for 3 readings and adoption. Number 1, CVRD bylaw number 4306, Satellite Park Water System Management Amendment bylaw 2020. Number 2, CVRD bylaw number 4307, Douglas Hill Water System Management Amendment bylaw 2020. Number 3, CVRD bylaw number 4308, Fern Ridge Water System Management Amendment bylaw 2020. Number 4, CVRD bylaw number 4309, Dogwood Ridge Water System Management Amendment bylaw 2020. Number 5, CVRD bylaw number 4310, Arbutus Ridge Water System Management Amendment bylaw 2020. Number 6, CVRD bylaw number 4311, Cherry Point Water System Management Amendment bylaw 2020. And number 7, CVRD bylaw number 4312, Shawnigan Lake North Water System Management Amendment bylaw 2020.
Seeing no other hands, call the question. All in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. R14, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R14 is a report from the Water Management Division regarding Cary Village water inclusion request for 1080 Shawnigan Mill Bay Road and Lot 3 Shawnigan Mill Bay Road.
Mr. Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our Cary Village water system has 2 outstanding liabilities, which we've been wrestling with. One is insufficient water. We obtained a new well as part of an arrangement with an adjacent property a number of years ago. Unfortunately, that capacity has been dropping off, as it has in a number of the wells serving Mill Bay Waterworks in the surrounding area. The second thing is that as of spring in 2019, Island Health changed, not just Island Health, the province changed its rules based on the Canadian Drinking Water Quality Guidelines, and manganese, which is present in the water here, has now become a health concern. So a number of our systems have manganese, and we're trying to address that and look for alternatives in all of the ones that we have that problem. Manganese is very difficult to get out of the water. It presents quite a challenge. For Cary Village, we kind of polled the adjacent community, found one well from a private property owner, tested that well to see if we could make use of it. It turns out to have impacts on a number of other private wells in the area, so we couldn't pursue that. And we've been looking for an opportunity to try and address both the water shortage problem and the manganese problem with this small utility, which serves primarily seniors. An adjacent property owner is pursuing a development, and because of the density bonus, if they tie into the water system, they would be able to increase their yield of lots from 6 to 13, so 7 additional lots. In discussions with staff, we've tentatively agreed, providing of course the board agrees, that if they provide a new well on their property, which they've already drilled, and provide for manganese treatment, and then they could we put forward the recommendation to join the service area. So they've agreed with that idea. We did a test using our own resources of a new treatment technology called Phylox which was very successful. We were very pleased with the results of that. So it looks like that would be a technology we can use in our other locations as well to address our manganese problem. So they have this new well. It's rated at 52 US gallons per minute. But during the testing, the water level only dropped a small amount in the well, so it indicates that it actually has substantially higher capacity available at it. We've done the testing on the water, and it's basically very similar to the water we have in our existing system. So water quality-wise, it's similar, but there's a lot more of it. So they are prepared to pay for tying that well into the system and the required manganese treatment. And that would be sufficient for certainly their subdivision and for the existing needs of Kerry Village Water, solving that problem. At this point, we are working towards an actual agreement with them on all the bits and pieces of this potential arrangement. So at this time, we're just recommending first readings, and then once the agreement has been finalized and adopted by the board, adoption of the bylaw at that point.
Thank you. Questions for staff? Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Dennison. Vilox, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So there's a number of technologies available for removal of manganese. Manganese is really tricky to deal with, and there's other jurisdictions in the province struggling with it as well as we are. Vilox is it's like a green sand type of material, so it's a large chamber, and there's this sand-like material in there that's kind of darkly colored. And the water rich in manganese passes through, and it's absorbed, which is a chemical term, on the surface of these particles. And Vilox is just a different arrangement. It's similar to green sand, but it's quite a bit more effective. And it was proposed to be, but we wanted to test it first, and we've been quite pleased. So now we hope to use it. In fact, in Lambourne, we're thinking we've already got the basins there, we've already got the vessels. So just changing out the existing material there, which is called manganate, for Vilox, I think was going to help quite a bit with the results there. Vilox is not cheap, but it seems to be, based on this test, quite effective. So this could be the solution for us for a number of our systems.
Is it in relation to the
I just want to know how to spell Vilox.
Oh.
So I can I want to Google it.
We'll give you some more information on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any questions related to the resolution? Turn to the director for the area.
Thank you. Just one, so on the process, so all the things the developer pays for, you will get specified to us before?
Correct, in an agreement, yes, a binding agreement for both parties.
I'll see that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Would you like to move the recommendation?
I would also like to move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Wilson. Any discussion on this item? Call the question. All in favor? Is there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Next item is Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R15 is report from the Water Management Division regarding Sewer System Management Bylaw 2020 amendments.
Mr. Dennison.
Still here, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I get comfortable up here, and then it's all going well.
You've done it before.
These are three amendment bylaws for user fee increases for sewer systems now that, as approved in our 2020 budget process.
Any questions for Mr. Dennison? Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Salmon. Ms. Harrison, would you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the following bylaws be considered for 3 readings and adoption. Number 1, CVRD bylaw number 4303, Cowichan Bay Sewer System Management Amendment bylaw 2020. Number 2, CVRD bylaw number 4304, Sentinel Ridge Sewer System Management Amendment bylaw 2020. And number 3, CVRD bylaw number 4305, Eagle Heights Sewer System Management Amendment bylaw 2020.
Seeing no hands, call the question. All in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. R16, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R16 is a report from the Water Management Division regarding force main break and budget amendment to Eagle Heights Sewer System.
Mr. Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a force main, or a pressure pipe, that connects the Eagle Heights Christopher Road pump station to the Joint Utilities Board treatment system for conveying sewage for treatment and disposal. It's about 2 kilometers long, crosses under the Cowichan River, and has been in place for about 43 years. It serves Eagle Heights itself, also the Cowichan Bay force main coming from Cowichan Bay, and one of the Cowichan Tribes force mains as well, or pump stations as well, that connects into it. It's been there, for 43 years without incident to date. However, on February 3rd, just after our superintendent, Todd Etherington, and the outside crew had been battling our big flood, there was a major leak discovered in this line. So they'd already had a pretty tough weekend, and then this came along. So it was, it's a pretty big deal to deal with it. It's a large pipe, a 12-inch pipe, and under some pressure. Over the years, a line of cottonwood trees have grown almost on top of the pipe, and the pipe has been deformed somewhat by that. So it's been squashed a little bit, and so it creates some stresses in the pipe. So there's a whole kind of crack that developed on the bottom of the pipe, and a lot of sewage was coming out of there. Of course, we reported that to the PEP program and everything else. So about 1 day and $60,000 later, they had that repaired, and it was back in service. So that was done under emergency basis, and we just had to do that, and we spent the money. But we do need to amend the budget now accordingly to have the money in place. The bills to date are about $60,000. We think we've got them all covered off, but just in case, we're saying $75,000. Now, the interesting thing with this is we have a reserve fund that we've been accumulating very gradually over the years, and this is a little bit of asset management, setting it aside for the use for this pipeline. And now the day has come. We were expecting the day many years yet to come, but it did come now. So we're proposing to use this resource, convey that into the budget to pay for this cost as it stands now.
Excellent. Any questions for staff? Director Nicholson.
So all the people who have sewer units pay into this service function, or how does this work?
All the people, so the function, the monies came from the two budgets. So all the connected and properties within the service area and connected people pay that money. Now in Eagle Heights, it's only, there's no parcel tax, so it's just people connected to Eagle Heights that contributed to that. In Cowichan Bay, it's some vacant properties, not very many, but a few vacant properties, plus all the connected people that contributed to that fund.
Okay.
Follow-up?
And do you have any concerns about the pipe going under the Cowichan River?
Yes. Yes, we do. It seems fine. We actually took a look after these recent flood events just to make sure it's fine, and it's fine right now. But that is it's a very complicated matter to do works in a river like that now. When it was built 43 years ago, much simpler, but now it's a very, very complicated thing. So if that were to fail, that would be a very challenging and very, very expensive problem to deal with. So it is something we're thinking about as well on a staff level, how to approach this and how to look at dealing with this pipe. Also, this row of cottonwoods, that's an issue as well. And it turns out, you know, sadly, that the bedding around the pipe was not very good either. So there's a chunk of log sitting there amongst the bedding material, which is completely wrong. But so when they did that in the 70s, they didn't pay a lot of attention, unfortunately, to the bedding that was put in. So, but it has, you know, it's been here for 43 years, so it couldn't, you know, it's managed. But once you have that sort of failure, in our experience in other utilities, it's very unpredictable, but our experience, say, in Saltaire, you know, we start to see failures, and then we start to see more failures, and it really starts to ramp up. Similarly in Shawnigan, we had Shawnigan for years, nothing ever happened, and then we started to see a couple of years ago, a few failures, and now we're starting to see more and more. So often it comes like that. So it is something that we're thinking about how to approach replacing that line or twinning it probably in another location so that it's not, you're not subject to the same, whatever condition would affect it in its current crossing, we'd look at some other arrangement for a crossing that would be either another location or maybe not even under the river, maybe on a bridge or something.
Director Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. More a comment and a pat on the back. One thing I admire about engineers is that they tend to plan ahead and use the asset management functions very well. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Anderson. Well done.
Director Smith?
Through the chair to staff. So just listening to the conversation you're having with, as an answer to Director Nicholson, you're indicating that the pipe is 43 years old.
Mm-hmm.
If the pipe breaks or has an issue, it then becomes the CVRD board's liability under environmental. Does the liability come to the CVRD as a whole if there's some sort of break?
So liability
Mr.
is an
Dennison.
interesting one. So I'll venture out on this, and I may need some help from my colleague there in finance. But from what I understand is that the first level of liability goes to the function itself. So let's say that a small system of 30 homes has a $2,000 lawsuit. Well, they would just pay that out of that small system. It's significant money to a small system, but it's payable, it's doable, so they would have that liability. As the liability issue crosses a certain threshold, it then spreads out to the entire regional district as to be responsible for if it's just too large for the service area that's involved. And further, if it's a very large issue of some kind, would actually extend to the province. That's my understanding of the overall liability. That's correct? Okay, so I'm on track with that. So yeah, there's the first liability is to that system itself, though. And if it's a larger system, they have fairly substantial resources to deal with something, but as it gets bigger, it may transcend that. So for example, even the whole regional district, that includes the municipalities. So to a certain degree, the municipalities take on liability for our electoral area services, should they go awry.
But just to add to that, generally, we don't have the province coming after us for accidents. It's demonstrated neglect that we're usually fined for, and I'm pretty sure that our staff are pretty good at avoiding those sort of scenarios.
Yes, as far as liability, yeah, for a lawsuit or something, unless we're found to be negligent, there's two situations that we don't get coverage. If we're negligent, so if we are aware of a problem and don't address it reasonably, or that there's an actual deliberate act of some kind. So hopefully that would never happen. But negligence you have to be very careful about. So in some circumstances where we've seen some failures in one area, we really want to make sure that we've got that covered. There can be a defense if if some issues of priorities are brought to the board, if there's a board resolution saying, no, address this priority, we're aware of this concern, this liability issue, but on the overall picture of things, we have to address this one first. That can be a defense for that. That doesn't work at a staff level, but it works at a board level. So that's always the thing to consider as well. But generally speaking, we try and keep on it, and if there's something, we try and address it, even if it's difficult.
So as usual, you've been very informative, and this has been a very interesting discussion, but the resolution is about a budget amendment. So have we had this moved and seconded yet? Would someone like to move and second? Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Nicholson. Would you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the 2020 budget for functions 820 Eagle Heights Sewer System be amended to increase transfer force main capital reserve funding by $75,000, increase capital engineering structures by $75,000, and that the expenditure of these funds prior to adoption of the budget bylaw amendment be approved.
Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dennison. Once again, very enlightening. Next item, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item, R17, is a report from the Parks and Trails Division regarding cancellation of an MOTI permit to construct.
Mr. Chair, if I might interrupt very quickly, I have an appointment at 4 o'clock next door in the doctor's surgery. I'd like your permission just to leave for 15 or 20 minutes and come back again.
You can certainly do so. Do you want to stay for this item, or are you going to dash right now? Fair enough. Mr. Farquhar.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee. It's wonderful to be back here with Electoral Area Services Committee for Electoral Area Parks Matters. And to start off with, we got one for a bang here, which is cancellation of a MOTI permit to construct for a no longer used access adjacent to our Mill Bay Nature Park. And for clarity, Mr. Chair, these permits to construct issued by the ministry are for making improvements within their road rights of way. It's not for the CVRD to take on the responsibilities for the entirety of the right-of-way. And given we no longer have a set of stairs to the beach because we have a much better pathway through the park, it's redundant in terms of any future investment for staircase going down to the beach area. So we're looking to the committee's support for removing our permit with the ministry so that we no longer have a liability there to maintain something that doesn't exist.
Excellent. Do we have any questions for staff? Turn to the director.
Recommendation, make a very quick comment.
Seconded by Director Yanni Donardo. Director Salmon.
Just to say, because Mr. Evans asked about it in question period, but I did double check this morning, had a quick look down there, and we do indeed still have great access to the beach from the trail. And also I checked with our Parks Commission chair, because it was before my time, but it was also approved by the Parks Commission, so both of those means why I'm supporting this.
Thank you. Ms. Harrison, recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure be requested to cancel permit to construct number BU 848/90, as the CVRD no longer requires the permit due to removal of the developed public access within the Hollings Road right-of-way.
Seeing no other hands, call the question. All in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Next item, R19, Ms. Harrison.
Isn't that R18?
R18's been pulled.
Oh, right, thank you. Thank you for the reminder, Mr. Chair. Next item, R19, report from the Parks and Trails Division regarding the 2020 budget amendment for Electoral Area A, Mill Bay, Malahat Community Parks.
Mr. Farquhar.
Mr. Chair, this report's before you at the request of Director Salmon for consideration of inclusion of $25,000 transfer from capital reserves into the 2020 budget for investment in the Mill Bay Community Wharf for replacement of the floating dock, which has reached end of life. So the report before you is about a budget amendment for inclusion in the 2020 budget.
Any questions for staff? Seeing none, turn to the director.
Move the recommendation.
Seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion? Ms. Harrison, recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the 2020 budget for budget function 231, Electoral Area A Community Parks, be amended to increase transfer from capital reserve by $25,000 and increase land improvements by $25,000.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Farquhar. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 9, there is no unfinished business. Item 10, we dealt with earlier in the agenda, so we are on to item 11.
We're at question period. Is there anyone in the gallery that would like to pose a question to the chair on items on our agenda today? Welcome.
Mr. Chair, on R1, on our CVRD curbside recycling contamination rate, on attachment A is a chart, and it goes, the chart goes by routes and it goes by areas. So in area B, it looks like we're covered in about 4 places, but we have no idea what route is what. Like, for instance, route number 7 in B area, what streets, that doesn't tell me anything, because, well, it tells me what the audits are, but I have no idea how we're doing. So when they make this chart up, I wonder if they could put in Route 7B and just give maybe a few of the roads or the area it covers, and then we could see, the public could see how we're doing, because there's a great variation in area B between some places like at 14.78% contamination rate down to 9.77, or in one area 570, and no doubt that'll be on our road. So is there any sense?
I'll pose the question to staff.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to pose a question? Seeing no other questions for the chair, I think the next item will likely be Ms. Harrison to resolve into closed session under Community Charter Part 4, Division 3, Section 90, subsections noted on the agenda. Do we have a motion to that effect? Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Salmon. Any discussion? All in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Take 5 minutes, and wow, I have to congratulate everybody on your fine performance. I thought we'd still be here at 5:30, so.